Hey guys, Angry Dave here. Want to go through our next installment of bbhits, which is going to be a little bit of a tutorial on how to do some of these hits here. The next one we're going to be doing is the Maze Rush, which is one of the most difficult hits in the game. Before Duplexity came out, I would say it was probably the most difficult. That and Green Court are probably the two most difficult rushes at the Forlorn Hope level. And even still more difficult than even some of these Duplexity rushes as well. So, really difficult hit. We're in Angry Lions. We got the homie Angry Crickets. His actual name is Wawi. He is their Maze Rush specialist in Lions. So we're gonna go through his hit and view it through one time, and then we're gonna break it down. A couple things I want to note: he is 6 GBE, 4 troop damage. And one thing that I really want to note is, if you look at the attack log here, he is, it took all 25 hits to finish this op. And this is the last hit of the op. So, massive amount of pressure because this is already a really intense hit. And he had to do it at the end of the op. And if he didn't nail this hit, they fail. So, really clutch hit from this guy. So, here we go. Alright, it's mostly a standard maze. There's a couple things off. Notice he's bombing the last bit of mines here. The attackers before him couldn't get all the mines down, so he's actually going through and bombing out the stragglers, I'd say. He is doing a flag landing and letting the troops walk over, trying to conserve as much EV as possible. This is an 8 or a 9 shocker, depending on how you look at it. It's an 8 with gangster shocks, with 2 gangster shocks. It is 9 if you want to play it a little bit more conservatively. Make sure you guys do the math anytime you do this hit. Including Bart, this hit, speed this up for while he's collecting cells. Including the Barding that he had to do, this is a 289 GBE hit. So at this point, he is perfect 6'4", which is 185 GB, so he needed 35 cells to go ahead and just do his hit as standard. I'm going to go ahead and slow it down. If you notice, he regroups his troops, which is what you always want to do before starting your walk. And then he does an intermittent flare between the sniper towers, which, if you have the GB to do it, is a good idea. It's not required. You can flare all the way to this next flare point that you're going to see, which is right by the shock punchers. But afford that extra flare right by the sniper towers. That keeps your troops even tighter, which is a good thing. It's going to go ahead and flare towards the core and do a triple smoke really fast. Get that smoke for the barbed wire, and then the 2 smokes really covering and making sure his troops won't peek. Because if they peek on this hit, you're done. Hear his shocks come out. Super fast, on time, and he easily takes this down. It was absolutely a beautiful hit, especially being such a clutch hit. This was pretty awesome. All right, we're gonna go ahead and break this down. First thing that I want to point out here is on the beach. On the beach, he has just a sniper tower here. If you do not have a sniper tower, that is actually non-standard because usually there is a shock blaster. So you usually do have to use a smoke on the beach for the shock blaster. Now your smoke point for that is there is a little vertical line from this laser beam that I'm just pointing out. This laser beam going straight down to the beach. So you'll actually put your smoke on the higher of the 2 vertical lines, or horizontal lines, straight from that vertical line actually on the beach to protect your troops from the shock blaster if you have that. He doesn't have that in this case, so he just goes ahead and does a flag landing. Now if you notice what he does first, the very first thing he bombs right here behind the core is a mine. There is always a mine behind the core there. Make sure you look for it back here and bomb it. That is one of the most common mistakes for a full-on breezy if you don't drop an artillery on that mine. So it may take some scrolling on your screen to be able to see it, but there is a mine back there. Make sure you Bard it. And then of course he drops one on the shield. You do not want to end up on the shield rush leaderboard, so please make sure if you've got a shield up there, you drop it first before you start thinking about everything else in your hit, because otherwise you will have a full-on breezy if you rush the shield and it's still up. And he's going through and clearing out mines. He does a barrage there. He does an artillery for these ones right here to kind of get the leftover. Make sure it's all nice and clear. And he does have a nice and clear kill zone there. Flag deploys right here in the corner, and then doesn't even want to risk any of his troops going that laser beam range. He keeps everything, you know, flares over to the far left and gets his troops out of there, keeps them out of harm's way. We're going to 4-speed this part. And he's just going to collect cells. Now, one trick to collecting cells, because this can take a lot of time, is you would actually flare up on a cell. So from this point, I would say flare on like this cell up here. Oh, the tap's not letting me do this here. So about 4 cells up from where the troops are standing, flare your troops onto a cell. They will kill that cell, but they will really spread while it takes them to kill that cell. And then they're really spread out, and they'll just hang out in cells really spread out, and they kill a lot more cells faster. So that's a trick to kill out some cells faster if you need to, especially if time is a concern. At this point, he's just taking cells and then flares them back over. Now, the reason why you want to flare them back over is there's usually these laser beams. Sometimes there's rocket launchers, and then of course there's these boom cannons here. You don't want to take cells and have your troops spread into these ranges and start getting picked off. So he flares over towards the wall, keeps collecting cells. And at this point, if you notice, pause it right there, his troops were getting really, really spread out. So what he did is, and what you should do is before he destroys that last cell, he gets his troops flared back together. That way they're nice and tight, and he's ready for his walk. So we're going to slow this down to single speed. He's going to let his troops kill that last cell while the others are grouping up. And now he drops an intermittent flare in between these 2 sniper towers here, and kind of by that ice statue. Now the health on this core is about a 1.9 million core. Now if you notice, after all those cells are gone, the health is about 55 to 60% of that. So just taking all the cells does a lot of damage to the core. So he's really only got about, I would say, a 1.2 million rush, somewhere shade north of there, 1.1. So that's how much he's got to take off this core in order to finish this base. He's got this intermittent flare. I said on the open, it's a good idea to keep your troops together if you can spare the gunboat energy. Sometimes you don't always have that, and you would just flare straight to by these shock launchers, which will be his actually second flare point. But if you can use that intermittent flare, it's not going to hurt you GBE wise, then go ahead and use it. Keep your troops nice and tight. Now he's approaching these sniper towers, so he gets his smoke out nice and early. Delay is so important, so you're going to see his smokes overlap. It's not because he's a poor smoker. It's because he's absolutely making sure that not one single troop peaks. And right now, at this point, he's letting them get all caught up. So it's really important to actually overlap on this walk, because if you lose any sort of delay on any of these rocket launchers, any of these laser beams, you are done for. So make sure that you smoke heavy on this run as you're walking up, and keep your smokes nice and thick. That way you don't risk loss of delay, because that can instantly ruin a hit. Now he uses 8 shocks on here. He can easily use 9, but he chooses to use 8 because he's a little gangster. Now his shock points, let's start at 12 of the core here, are these 2 mortars and the defenses that surround them. His next shock point will be on this shock launcher, which is the middle of the 3 left of the core. It won't let me tap on it for whatever reason. The smoke timer's there. But it's in between these 2 shock launchers. The middle shock launcher is going to be his next shock point. After that, needs a shock on these 2 laser beams and the surrounding defenses. So what he'll most likely do is actually shock on this cannon right here. After that, he's got shocks that are needed over here on these 2 laser beams. These 3 rockets right here need a, which is down at 7 o'clock in the core. These need a shock. And here's where he gets gangster. Typically, if you want to keep it more conservative, you just put a shock on these 2 laser beams at 6 of the core. And then a separate shock on these 3 shock launchers over here at 4 of the core. And then a 3rd shock on these 2 laser beams. That's one way to keep it conservative. Have the GBE for 9 shocks. You want to keep it conservative and get your shocks out fast. It's not a bad approach. While we chooses to be a little gangster, and he actually does this in 8 shocks by shocking these laser beams, this machine gun, and these and this shock launcher all as one. Actually, the 2 shock launchers, I believe. And then the same thing on the other side here. He gets laser beams, machine gun, shock launcher, all as one again. And then he does a shock for these top rockets. And this rocket that, if you remember, PA tried to get but it was unsuccessful in our last video, he needs a shock there. Now that rocket is not normally there, but you have to look out for the non-standard stuff. You have to keep an eye for stuff that's not normally there. Now, one thing that commonly can become an issue or has confusion. This laser beam, if you flare at the right point, put your troops in the right spot, is not in range, which is this 3rd one from the bottom at 6 o'clock. So that laser beam's not in range of the kill zone. Same thing with the laser beam at 3. This laser beam at 3 is not in range of the kill zone. So you do not need to worry about shocking this set of laser beams either. And then these far rockets over here are not in range either. Neither is this rocket at the very bottom. Although it looks really close, it actually ends up not being. Flare, if you do your timing right, your troops will actually spread back to the top left, away from this rocket launcher range. So nothing needed on that one. Okay, so at this point, he's waited for his troops to get to his last flare point, and then as soon as the first troops get there, he's now just done his flare to this open spot between the core and these boom cannons right here. And that's where he's going to park his troops. Then what he does is a triple smoke. One on the barbed wire between the boom cannons and these shock launchers. So 1 on those barbed wire, and 2 to cover this space between these boom cannons and the core. So he's making sure his smokes are really heavy. He's absolutely making sure he does not lose delay or no troops, kind of leak out to the side or anything like that. That's why his smokes are so heavy. And we're going to put this down to half speed. There's the flare, and then immediately all as one, 3 smokes. So the 1 on the barbed wire, the 2 covering the kill zone. You do not need a heal on that barbed wire. Troops walking through only 1 set of barbed wire do not need the heal. So just a heads up there. You do not need that. So he's going to be flaring to the core in just a second. He's waiting for his troops to get to that flare point. And there's his flare to the core with about 30 seconds, or not 30 seconds, but half the timer gone. And here comes his shots. And we'll go ahead and pause it right there. So he did nail all of his shocks. We'll go through the shock points. He put a shock right here on these mortars. He did put a shock on these shock launchers left of the core. He did get a shock on these 2 laser beams. He did get a shock on these laser beams. It hasn't hit yet, but it will. He got a shock on these rocket launchers down here. Got a shock, which is the 2 gangster shocks. Notice his shock points are right here on this kind of barbed wire and boom cannon area, which covers these shock launchers and the laser beams and the machine gun. Really nice shocks there. Another one right here. I'm going to break this down one more time. We're going to go in super slow-mo again in just a second. That way you guys can see them all, but I want to show you all the current shock points. One more up here on these two rockets, and one more up here on this single rocket up top. So what he does is, that's the key on this hit, is you just have to time out all your shock points. Now, a question that people ask, how do you get these shocks out so fast? You have to create a bit of muscle memory. What I do on, and I'm just going to bring out my tablet, it's blank, I don't have anything on it right now. But what you do is, in scout mode, I will seriously go through this like 20 times, and I just practice. I get it to where I fix the screen, where I can see them all in one spot, and then I literally just go this and just do it as many times to get the muscle memory down. That way when I'm doing the hit, my body kind of, you know, my hand already kind of knows where, you know, where my shock points are and how to hit it. So the homie Wawee does work and goes ahead and blows up the core. Now one thing you'll notice is you have a bunch of your troops are spread back towards the barbed wire that you just walked through. You'll have to make sure that your shock on the shock launchers is a little bit, make sure it's back on the shock launchers and not these boom cannons or machine guns, which are more commonly there. That way you don't want to shock a bunch of your girls. Okay, so he went ahead and popped that base. I'm going to go ahead and play this through one more time. I'm going to 4-speed it all the way through the cells and the bombing and all that, and I want you just to see the shock points. We're going to go in super slow-mo, and that way you can see the shock points, and I want to show you the gangster shock points as well. So at this point, just collect the cells. I wish there was a way to go faster. So there was like 10 speed or something. Just zip forward to all the cells. Here he comes again. And 3 smoke at the end. Flare in the core. So here's these lower shock points in slow-mo. Boom. And you can see all these lower shock points in a more zoomed up space there, and that's how he was able to nail all of them. And he's able to pop the core. Absolutely beautiful hit. Brilliant, considering it was the 25th hit in the op on a 25-man team. So if he didn't nail this, you know, they were going to lose out on a ton of force points. They're going to tumble down the leaderboard, and this was an absolutely clutch hit. So I hope you guys learned a few things today. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on Band or Telegram. Telegram, the name is Angry Dave. If you're in Band and under the Angry family, it's just Dave with a little trademark after that. All right, well, thank you guys very much. If you liked the video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel, and Dave is out.